You're listening to Interactive Wrestling Radio, featuring the Interactive Interview, courtesy of WrestlingEpicenter.com. Welcome back to Interactive Wrestling Radio. Joining us on the Newsmaker line is a gentleman I met when I was bickering with him about politics on Facebook, and then I looked up at his name and I'm like, oh man, I know who that is. Of course, I'm talking about the gentleman who many of us saw growing up, Mr. Dusty Wolfe. Are you with me, sir?
Yeah, I'm right here. You just made me feel real old, real quick.
Oh, I wasn't trying to do that at all. It's
I can't change the time.
Genuinely a pleasure to talk to you today. And I guess the simple question to start out with is, what have you been up to these days?
Well, I retired in 2011, and I didn't look back. I got a couple of graduate degrees and started teaching in college.
Very cool. What kind of subjects do you teach in college?
I teach history and political science, world civ.
Interesting. So not easy stuff to necessarily grasp if you're a layman out there, I guess.
Not to grasp with what?
Not if you're a layman out there. Somebody, you have to have
it's one of those things that there is no. It's not like math or science where there is a right or wrong.
Mm-hmm.
I touched. That's part of my teaching philosophy with these students is it's not that difficult to grasp. You just need to be able to, pay attention to what you're looking at. That's it. Rest of it's pretty much up to you.
Agreed. That sounds pretty cool. And I did hear and read and doing the research for this that you do have a book out, The Journal of a Journeyman. The book is out there now on Amazon.com. Pretty cool. I just did a pretty cool interview with Black Bart a couple days ago to promote his book that just came out. And your book is interesting. What made you decide to sit down and write it?
Originally, it was almost like a rib, in all honesty. Just sitting back telling stories and embellishing the good ones and forgetting the better ones, that sort of thing. And it just grew from there.
Very cool. And are you
the ego takes over in there somewhere. Otherwise, why would we write a book?
Very cool. And you got the chance to travel the world, and you got to see some of the territories that, were unfortunately when I was becoming a fan, were almost all teetering away in front of us due to the expansion of the WWE, WWF then. Thoughts on the traveling the territories, and do you miss that style of wrestling where you had the option to go to different territories and it wasn't all just basically the global phenomenon that is WWE today?
Well, if I was still around, yes. And that's coming from a man that worked for, WWF and WCW.
Mm-hmm.
That's where we learned. And while we weren't going to get as wealthy as some of these guys today do, we could make a constant living because we always had someplace to go. Mm-hmm. And it's essential to a young guy to be able to go to a Kansas City or a Memphis. And even if they don't, like Lawler didn't like me, Jarrett did. But you go in there and you stay for however long you stay. You're wrestling every night. And that's where you learn. So I definitely miss that. So I was still around. And just the idea that you're not as dependent on, I don't even know who runs the WWE now outside of Hunter, but whoever's involved in all that, talent relations, whatever, if you get on their bad side, where do you go?
Right.
What are your options?
They're limited, that's for sure.
Very much so. I mean, Ron can only hire so many people.
Mm-hmm.
And then when you got people talk about TNA or they talk about this group or that group, they're not paying.
Mm-hmm. They're very small.
Where do you go? Where do you go? Whereas you knew you weren't going to make as much in Kansas City as you were Charlotte. You weren't starving either.
There you go.
I'm out now, so it's a young man's game. But I certainly the difference is it's improved in some ways. In some ways, it hasn't.
Yeah, a lot fewer places to go, and then once you get beyond WWE and AEW, like you said, you're dealing with companies that we see as, the number 3 and number 4 companies, but they're not very big. You're talking about TV audiences, in the 80,000 range. So not very big.
Yeah, and it's all about making your money. That's why it's called professional. And the independent scene, when I quit, I don't know what it's like, here 13 years later. I just know what little bit I see online. I don't think it's anybody. I think maybe it's even worse than it was when I left. And that was the idea that you couldn't make your paydays because there were so many people willing to do what you did for nothing.
There you go. So I'm going to ask you, what did you like to call yourself? The book says Journal of a Journeyman. I hear the word jobber used, enhancement talent. Is there any preferred pronoun for a career? What was that again?
Absolutely. We're all wrestlers.
Wrestlers.
Yeah. If you're going to try to pigeonhole people, and it makes life easier, I guess, in some cases. You had your top guys, you had your mid-card guys, and you had underneath guys. That's, I was somewhere in the underneath mid-card, depending on where I was at, what time period it was.
Very cool. We talked a little bit about the territories, but the WWF was kind of exploding in the late 80s, and I was growing up with it really around me because I was in the Northeast, and that's kind of where it all stemmed from and outwards from. What was the differences for you as a performer to go from going to world class and maybe wrestling in the Sportatorium or wrestling in Florida in their Sportatorium in Tampa, and then going to WWF and seeing, the Civic Centers and the Madison Square Gardens and so forth?
Well, the bigger buildings in the very beginning, they are a little nerve-wracking when you're a young kid, which I was when I went to New York. I was only 26 or so. But it's not as bad as you would seem, because, Memphis has Mid-South Coliseum, 10,000 people. Here in San Antonio, we had the arena has 10,000 people. I mean, it wasn't like you were never in the bigger buildings. The product was a little bit different, but as long as you had an idea of what you were doing, you could listen a little bit. The product wasn't even that much different than what people want to try to make it sound like. The presentation was different. The talent was expected to look better than they had just a few years prior and so forth. But if you knew your craft, once you got used to being in the bigger buildings more often, there just wasn't really a lot of difference except your paycheck.
Very cool.
There's a product now. I don't watch much, if any. I may go months without watching. But when I do watch, the in-ring product's nothing like what we did. So, that has changed in the last 10, 15, 20 years.
That was kind of going to be my question, is that there are no quote-unquote squash matches anymore. I mean, they just don't exist. Even on what they consider secondary shows like Main Event and so forth, almost every match is, at least 5 to 7 minutes, and it's, competitive, and there's really... There's no clear-cut, this is the one that's getting the push. It's kind of a 50-50 booking. I think so. That's what I was going to ask you. Do you think that's a missing art form or a missing part of the puzzle?
Yeah, I don't know if you could have kept squash matches going, but you would have definitely bettered the product if you had the ability to emphasize certain people each week, and there was, like you said, there was no back and forth. Some back and forth maybe in the match, but at the end of the day, you were preparing so-and-so to put them against so-and-so and build that, which is what the squash matches did. Once the business went prime time, I'm still around those days, mid-late 90s. Once they went into Raw and then Nitro and all those shows, the squash match, it's done. It's inevitable that the squash matches will become history, because you can't just put one after another of those on prime time and keep the ratings.
I agree.
And then that's hindsight,
Yeah.
That's 20, 30 years later. But yeah, you see that that wasn't going to continue, but I think they took it too far. As I said a minute ago, you have a list of guys that they're not going to get their hands raised that often, but there's always that outside chance they go out there and have a competitive match, 5, 6, 8 minutes, but you're still building guys that they don't get in the ring with each other, and they don't put each other over or get DQ'd every week and that sort of thing against each other. You just the idea of creating an angle, even if there was somebody left that knew how to do it besides Hunter, I don't know if people wanted it anymore.
Very cool. Growing up, I was like I said, I was in New Jersey, so Jim Powers was kind of like a local celebrity. So when he came into the gym, he could go behind the counter, he could put on whatever music he wanted to listen to, and nobody was going to argue with him because that's Jim Powers. He's in WWF.
Yeah.
I mean, you guys, there were definitely stars that weren't just Hulk and Macho. That's for sure.
Yeah. I don't know. Like I say, with hindsight, the squash match was a thing of the past once everything went network in prime time. That was just inevitable.
Yeah.
The biggest problem you have there is you had a TV guy in Atlanta by the name of Bischoff that knew how to create a good 2-hour TV show, but he had no clue about wrestling.
I actually have
He beat Vince for a while, which scared Vince, and so Vince had to top him. And just like anything else, when you have to keep topping each other, what do you come back with?
Yeah, hot shot and the bottom falls out, I guess.
Eventually, that's what and when Vince first had the pay-per-views, he was still building things that took months to get to. Bischoff comes along and he has the monthly pay-per-view, and he's building from pay-per-view to pay-per-view at best. And Vince had to try to compete. You can't go backwards. You can't do that because people are going to accept it.
That's true. So if this was a video interview, behind me, over my right shoulder, you would see I have a pair of tights signed by Tiny Lister, Zeus. Did one of the very few wrestling interviews he did later in his life, which I was very honored to do. He was a cool guy, really interesting guy. You were kind of paired with him. You were on the road with him. You were kind of his married to him, if you will.
Pretty much.
What was it?
I was his caretaker or his babysitter.
There you go. What was it like traveling with somebody like that who did not come from the business, who was kind of being baptized by fire into it?
I don't know, where do I start? When we started, he tested me a little bit and wanted to see what he could get by with, wanted to see what the kid would do, that sort of thing. We had words once, almost a year together. And the one time we had the words, he never we became friends after that. I mean, that's about how I knew it was a test. Beyond that, like I say, once we became friends, there were times where I was like a peacekeeper. Because you had guys that resented him coming in and making that, serious money and being pushed and out of Hollywood. And I would have to explain to him, not that it's right, but that's what's going on with them. And then I would have to talk to guys that I had known for years and, dude, you would be doing the same thing if you had been given an opportunity. That's the two things I really remember. Going up down the road with him he was late all the time. I don't know if he even owned a watch. I think I bought him one after about 3 months, and I don't think he ever kept it. I mean, he was just always late. I remember that. But like I say, once we had the one time we had the words. After that, we actually became friends.
That's pretty cool.
There was respect there, and I always regretted not seeing him again before he passed.
Yeah. I think it was 2009 I did an interview with him, and there was really nothing to promote. I just somebody said, "Hey, you want Tiny Lister's number?" And I'm like, "Is he calm?" And they said,
always.
"Yeah, he was the sweetest guy, really cool guy."
He was a nice guy.
There you go.
Friendly with everybody. He knew when to be Zeus when we would get in the car and we were headed to the building. From that point until the time we got back to the hotel, he knew to be Zeus. He knew there was a gimmick, right? He understood that even if he had never been in the business.
Very cool.
Just traveling, going to gyms or whatever. Yeah, he was fun.
You mentioned Hunter a few times, and when you mentioned him and when we were discussing earlier about enhancement talent, I remember some of the guys didn't know how to take the pedigree at first, and they would land really high up on their necks, and it looked like it damn near killed them. And then, of course, there was the incident with Chad Austin, with Marty Jannetty, and the scary moment with him and him ending up in a wheelchair. Was it difficult to kind of like, okay, this is the move we're going to do for the guy that was going to be taking the new finisher that maybe hadn't been seen all that much? Was it a difficult like process to go through, or was it just another day at the office?
Not for me. The only time I ever refused to do a finish was the Road Warriors finish.
Oh, the Doomsday device?
Yeah, whatever they call it, where they come off top rope, you flip midair and land it on your face. And I wouldn't. And the office asked me, does it worry you? Yes. Okay, don't worry about it. Other than that, no, most of those moves, as long as the man working with you is not stiff or pushing away he's not supposed to, it's just, like you say, another day at the office.
Very cool. I heard another interview. You were talking a little bit about the Ultimate Warrior, and it reminded me of a Bobby the Brain Heenan interview I did, where he talked about the night that Andre finally had enough and put his fist up. And
put his fist up and nearly killed him. I thought he was going to kill him. I was there that night. I forget where we were at. But, yeah, it was just, all he did was just put his hand out with his fist. And just, hey, hold
boom.
on.
He said he cracked the face paint.
Well, here I got to kill him. I think it may have been Indianapolis. It was that direction. Cincinnati, Indianapolis, one of those towns that direction. And Andre buzzed me. Watch this, folks. And so, I'm going to watch 45, because they had two matches. One of them would go about 45 seconds, and the other would go about 5 minutes. And I'm like, okay. I'd seen both of them a handful of times already, right? So I walked out, and I thought he killed him.
Oh, man. Was he a difficult guy to get along with, or was he a nice guy, the Ultimate Warrior?
Andre, it depends on who you were.
No, I meant Warrior, but
Warrior, pretty much the same thing. It depends on who you were.
Very cool, because I've known people that have, ranted and raved about what a jerk he is, and then I've talked to other guys who've said they had no problem with him. They thought he was a great guy.
They're both right. And they're both correct, because the Warrior didn't really care about the business like the rest of us did.
Right.
The Warrior saw the business as a way to make money, which is not necessarily a bad thing, but there was no, I don't know, camaraderie may be a hard word, or maybe not. He didn't feel a kinship to anybody. It was, I'm here to make mine, and that's it.
Very cool.
So that can drive a wedge between some guys. Other guys, it's, they understood it, and as long as you treated him with a little bit of respect, he treated you with some.
Very cool. Did you ever think we'd be in a wrestling industry where the name McMahon has basically nothing to do with it anymore?
No. Well, I knew Vince eventually has to pass away. I mean, we all do. But he was grooming Steph, and he was grooming Shane got away, but he was grooming Steph to take his place, so I honestly figured that there would always be that lineage.
Right.
I honestly did. And once I saw the numbers that they were offered for the sell and everything, I can't say I blame anybody.
Right.
But yeah, those are unimaginable numbers.
It's kind of funny when you see people say, "Oh, poor Vince." I'm thinking Vince is anything but poor right now.
He's a billionaire. He's a billionaire with a capital B.
There you go.
When you realize that it goes all the way back to his grandfather, but then all things do have to end. I mean, that's just the nature of life. So I didn't think I'd ever see it. I never thought I would see it.
There you go. So the documentary series just finished ending this week. You kind of talked about it a little bit already, your time at WCW, but could you answer that question for me? The documentary title, Who Killed WCW?
Where I sit, it was a progression. As a guy that was just on the peripheral there, started with Jim Herd and whoever followed him and had the ultimate final say-so. And it's not just Jim Herd, but I mean, that's where everything starts. Mm-hmm. And then it's almost like the illness is diagnosed. I have a bad analogy, but that's the only way I know how to put it. That's where the illness is diagnosed. Then we get into some serious issues with Bischoff, and not because he didn't know how to put a TV together. He didn't know wrestling, and he was letting inmates run the asylum. He was overspending, et cetera, et cetera. He put the patient on life support.
Mm-hmm.
It had a great run doing it, so he kind of got by with more than you or I would have if we had to beat Vince for over a year, almost a year and a half.
Mm-hmm. And
then here comes Vince Russo, and he's like the guy that unplugs the life support to charge his telephone. Right, he was literally that ignorant to what he was doing. You could see it, you could watch it, and it was just like.
Did you ever? Trying to think, would you have ever crossed paths with Vince Russo?
No, I was done with WCW about the time he came in.
Yeah, that sounds about right.
I had finished with New York about the time. I knew he was somewhere around the periphery of the magazine and that sort of thing, but I never met him.
Very good. So I know you worked Dallas. You worked the Sportatorium in its later years for Global. One of the guys that worked there is a friend of mine, and he submitted a question for you. So it's Rod Price, and he asked
Rod very well.
And he asked me to tell the story about the Dutchman in the South African elevator.
Yeah, him and my best friend Ken Johnson we were all having a few adult beverages in one of the bars there at the casino where we were working at Sun City.
Mm-hmm.
And those two drunks, well, they bought like $100 worth of souvenirs and shirts and whatever each, but then they just left them under the table. So as they leave, I grab up everything for them, and I take them to my room, and I'm not in great shape either. I forget what rooms they're in, so I'm just going to go ahead and give them to them like the next day when I see them.
Mm-hmm.
He's in his room and realizes, I don't have my shirts, like my souvenirs. So if my room was like 915, he went to 519. You get the idea. He transposed the first and last number.
I get it. Yeah. Dyslexia.
He goes and he doesn't just knock on the door. He body knocks. He attacks it because he thinks it's me, and he's going to rib with me, and he's going to tackle me when I come through the door and whatever. You got my shirts, blah, 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 right?
Mm-hmm.
And I get told the story later, and not just from them, but I get told from the old fat Dutchman, too. There's an old fat Dutchman opens the door. He's got no clothes on. He said his nutsack was hanging to about his ankles. He's like, I don't have your damn shirts. And Rod's like, oh, I'm so sorry. That's what happened there.
That's awesome. So you mentioned you retired in 2011. What was your decision? What was the, obviously you can't go forever, but what made that year kind of, it's time to hang it up?
I had started looking to get out as early as 04 or 05 because the injuries were starting to add up and it was getting more difficult to make money. And in 07, I went back to college, but I didn't get out of the business yet. Then I started losing my mom, and my son was having some issues and whatever, so I started pulling back on the road a little bit. And I knew I had to do something. And what helped, like me just go ahead and pull the trigger and retire, was it just got to the point where you couldn't make a living anymore. That, guys were still running independent shows, and they would run, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. You could pick up dates. You could make overseas trips. You could actually, you may not get rich, but you will pay your bills. Those last 4 years that I was around, everybody wanted to run Saturday night. Nobody wanted to work together as far as the independents where you could pick up a show here and pick up a show there and make a little loop and go home. So it was the point where there was personal things going on, like I said, my mom and my son and so forth, and the injuries had started piling up, and I'm looking at what I wasn't making, and so it's time to go. I've had fun, but it's time.
There you go. There's something I did skip earlier on. I remember when I was a kid, I would there's a Hector Guerrero line. He used to say he had a drug problem. Every Sunday his parents drug him to church. That was the joke, and I was too. But that's also when Superstars or actually Challenge was on. So I used to record it and come back and watch it. And I remember coming back and watching it. And one week, you were just using a slightly different name, and I was like, that says it's Dale Wolfe. It's not Dusty Wolfe. And I'm like going back to an old tape. He used to be Dusty, right? And I go back and I check it. So what was the reason for the change? Dusty Rhodes.
Dusty Rhodes. Yeah. That was when he was coming in.
Ah, okay, that makes sense.
And Pat says I can't have two Dusties on my tape, and I'm like, I'm fine. We'll have in those days 220, 230. Brown hair. They're not going to be able to tell. I didn't say all this, but I was just going on in my mind. Okay, I'd rather you pay me anyway than worry about my name. And so we sat and talked for a few minutes. I said, just use my middle name. It'd just be easier that way. Yeah. So that's what we did.
That's cool. That's pretty simple. So you're the first guy I interviewed that I managed to tick off before I ever realized who he was, and also your wife as well. I ticked off, so I apologize to her for.
Don't worry about it. I do that daily.
There you go. Well, I was going to say, you mentioned your son, but it sounds like you got a whole new life going on right now. Did you want to talk about your current situation?
Yeah, I've got 3 adult children, and then I've got the 11-year-old. He just turned 11 a week ago. Oh. 4 grandkids. I'm living. I don't want to say storybook life, but I'm living a pretty good life. Like I said, I'm teaching at college. She's an attorney, so we're not hurting anywhere except physically. I'm going through the surgeries that all of us go through at this age. But that's it. Like I said, when I walked away, I walked away. I realized it was going to have to be a completely different path, or I would keep doing that, letting the mob drag me back in. One more hit, one more job. Yeah. So I just walked, and I stayed gone.
Did you ever see the movie The Wrestler?
Did I ever see what?
The movie The Wrestler?
Yes.
Well, I was going to ask you any.
That guy.
Yeah, exactly. That's what just came to mind, the way that you phrased that, coming back in.
I have some friends that, they're still my friends. I still think the world of them. But they would hang around, and be that guy that, he'd get a job here, he'd get a booking here or there. Yeah. And the money they were offering was, we were getting that 40 years ago and complaining. That kind of thing. It wasn't worth what was happening to me physically. I've had to have some surgeries to fix some things since then, and I just couldn't do it. I just couldn't justify it anymore to myself, to my family. The little one wasn't here yet, but I was done.
There you go. And I guess
I came in the way I planned as best I could. There's always detours on everything, but I came into the business pretty much the way I thought I should. I left it under my terms, too.
That's very cool. That's awesome. You definitely blazed your own path, and that's kind of my final question for you. Obviously, the book is probably going to be the thing that really tells your story and has the whole legacy, if you will, out there. Yeah. But what do you hope that your time in wrestling, what kind of a legacy do you hope it leaves for wrestlers to come?
I don't know that I have one. I honestly don't. I mean, because there's whole generations out there that have no clue who I was. Their history starts whenever they started trying to break into business. That's all they know. But if we were to go so far as to say I have one, for the most part I worked hard. For the most part I was a better talent than a lot of people would give me credit for because of what they see on those little 2-minute matches. More importantly, I gave back to those that followed me. I never trained anybody, but I always would take somebody that wanted some advice and give them what I knew. Help with what I knew I could help with. Hopefully, like I said, I entertained. I did my job. I'm sure I made a few people mad along the way. I'm sure some people will tell you I didn't do my job, but overall, did what I was asked. It left something behind that was better than when I started.
That's awesome. Well, hey, I do want to thank you for taking the time and doing this with me. It was a lot of fun, and I apologize for being a smartass before I realized who you were, and I'm like, oh, I don't want to.
You're a smartass. I've lived that life since I was about 9. So I mean, you're a smartass. You're a smartass. If you say things, you mean them. You mean them. I never apologize for that to anybody. No, please.
Yeah.
Some of the things you don't have regrets because you start having regret. I mean, you could wish you could have changed something here or there, but true regret means that you would change things that would end up changing where you're at today.
Yeah, that's right.
If you're in a bad spot, if you're in a bad place, maybe you should, but I get asked that all the time. You have any regrets? Some of the things that I might have changed or definitely could have done better, had I done differently, would I be where I'm at today?
Very cool. Yeah, Barry Horowitz. You mentioned Barry Horowitz in passing a few minutes ago. He was one of the guys that I know did not like to be called a jobber because he felt that it made him feel like that he wasn't a good wrestler. And I don't know that as a fan that we ever kind of thought that way. That was not really like the mindset that you had. You kind of computed different roles. And
well, the thing is I don't think it was necessarily considered derogatory until the internet comes along. And then the internet fans and the internet marks, they have to make themselves feel good. So there were quite a few folks like that did use the term in a derogatory way. I used to let it bother me too, because I know as Barry was, Barry's one of the most underrated workers ever. Mm-hmm. And I knew I was better than what people were saying. I knew what I was capable of, but then my whole thing was that if you were a jobber, you were stupid. And I'm like, okay, guys, I've navigated this business with no father, no friends, no family, just me. I've made a living for nearly 30 years. How stupid can I be? Mm-hmm. I got to a point where I realized that it was derogatory to make people feel better about themselves, and so I don't let it bother me anymore. I just shake my head at it now.
There you go. Well, like I said, I want to thank you for taking the time to do this with me. And is there a place where people can check you out online, maybe even buy something from you?
Yeah, the Facebook. I'm on Twitter at Rancho Wolf. Mm-hmm. That's pretty much all the thing I have. I don't have anything else besides the Facebook and the Twitter.
Sounds good. Well, I want to thank you again, and I'll talk to you on Facebook, and I'm sure we'll butt heads about things like last night's debate and so on and so forth in the future.
All right.
I appreciate you. Have a good day, sir.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
This is Interactive Wrestling Radio.
Interactive Wrestling Radio. Interactive Wrestling Radio. Interactive Wrestling Radio. Interactive Wrestling Radio. Interactive Wrestling Radio. Interactive Wrestling Radio. Oh, for us.
Featuring the interactive interview.
Interactive interview. Interactive interview. Interactive interview. Interactive interview. Interactive interview. Interactive interview. Oh, yeah.
Formerly The Blaze.
The Blaze. The Blaze. The Blaze. The Blaze. The Blaze. The Blaze. The Blaze. The Blaze. The Blaze. The Blaze rock.
You a maniac, so what you gonna do when the Blaze of Mania runs wild on you?
On WrestlingEpicenter.com.
Wrestling Epicenter.
Wrestling
Epicenter. Wrestling
Epicenter.
Wrestling Epicenter.
Wrestling Epicenter. The Wrestling Epicenter. Don't get off.
And now we shamelessly name drop from our history.
The Wrestling Epicenter would like to apologize for the following.
All right, everybody. Viva la raza. Viva la raza.
Hey, y'all.
Hello, ladies.
Hey guys, we had a lovely conversation. First lady, absolutely. Oh, look at me. She's so kooky.
Be there. Where else?
Interactive Wrestling Radio. Wrestling
Epicenter.
Oh my God, you win! Wow, being interactive.
Whoa! I just got some listen. I was gonna shoot him. Yeah, I almost missed my man. Breaking neck. I got 2 words for you. I've heard a lot about you guys. I see my language. You're gonna go to the shop. I see him now. We're into the many.
No nerves.
That was great. It's gonna be cool. Woo! What it's all about. The purest point of view. The living legend. Arrogant.
Jesus makes me.
Instead of saying when I'm talking to you.
So lonely without you.
Yeah.
In the land of extreme.
That's the 5. Nevermore. Interactive interview.
I'm not just the best.
Interactive interview with a plastic
You
head.
earned the right.
Nobody. You better keep listening. Thank you very much. Controversy creates cash. Professional wrestling.
Made in the USA, baby.
Memphis wrestling. The guy on fire.
We were sexy.
What a show.
One and only.
Interactive Wrestling Radio.
Wrestling
Epicenter. Interactive interview. We took care of the business. This isn't ballet. We are huge. You're where it's at. You better recognize who's the best. If you're smart, make sure to tune in each and every week. I'll come out of your computer, knock down your door, and turn it on for you. Or else I'm going to kick your stinking teeth in. And that's the bottom line.
Have a nice day.
It's showtime!
Don't forget to like and subscribe.